Well, hello everybody. Alison Wilde in the north, along with Miro in the northwest, and myself in the Midlands. Today we're going to talk about one single film, either very quickly or very laboriously, one or the other, depending on how it goes, because we're not too sure what each other thinks of the film. In English, it's called Advantages of Travelling by Train, and in Spanish, it's called Ventajas de Viajar en Tren. So I always like to say it in the original language because then everybody can laugh at my pronunciation. It's a film directed by Aritz, Moreno. It's Spanish, and it's an interesting film at the very least. So I'll start by saying I thought it was a deeply disturbing film, but I thought it was very, very good. Lots of interesting ideas, very challenging. In a way, it's a collection of different stories, but I didn't enjoy it, but I thought it was excellent. Alison.
I've got lots of questions, actually, more than comments, because I'm still actually processing it. Again, I thought it was quite disturbing. I'm not easily disturbed by films, but I did think in terms of a wider audience, a lot of people would hate it, I think, because it goes into too many, for want of a better word, dark places. Too many things are treated possibly lightly for most audiences. I quite like that. So overall, even though it could get confusing and I had to go back a couple of times and check what had actually happened, I did think it was really good. I mean, it mentions Russian dolls within it, and it definitely is that Russian doll type of film, and it just coheres together very well. Yeah, I mean, on one level, it seems to be mainly about exploring taboos, and of course, the prime one, the reason why we're watching it, there is disability. I thought the stuff on disability in it, with probably the exception of mental health, I thought the stuff on disability within it was really interesting, even kind of, particularly the bits that were self-referential about the characters' experiences of representation in contemporary media. So I'll leave it there for now. But yeah, overall, I thought it was a really good watch, if complicated.
Miro.
I felt very affected by the film, should we say. It's probably one of the first films that I really regretted having a mid-morning snack while watching it. And I'll leave that up to the audience to understand why. No, I was affected by it. I thought there was some really complex ideas being unraveled, like as Alison said, kind of going deeper into the self, trying to understand and make sense of our identity and of our lives. I think there was something in the idea of perceiving life as a form of storytelling, and that then allows us to determine or try to determine what is real and what is false. But also with the added question of, does it matter if something that we think to ourselves is true ultimately, it becomes we realize that it is false. And also, I think I agree with Alison's point. Thought, in terms of representation, there was problems with the mental health representation. There was problems with the representation of women, I thought, as well in the film.
Absolutely.
Which I think we can talk about later. But yeah, absolutely, the self-referential part, particularly with the character who is in an institution and is confined to his bed, and then eventually pursues a love interest. I thought that was really fascinating, and I suppose it reminded me of that idea of eschatology in a sense of trying to make sense of the final events of our history, and trying to make sense of what's the ultimate destiny of humanity. And there was, I think, a lot of reflection in the film about the way in which society has evolved and where we're up to in terms of treating children as commodities, disregard for rights, disregard for protection and security of ourselves. And I think that I would be interested to see what you thought, but both of you thought. But I think it was the idea of feces was quite symbolic in the film. Maybe is the director and the script writers a way of trying to make us reflect on the way in which our society has evolved, and perhaps what use are we to society, and how should we see ourselves, and how do we treat others particularly as well, in the sense of relationships and power.
Yeah. Sociologically, I kept thinking of Mary Douglas's work on pollution and taboo, and it was unremitting in actually going to those places. I mean, just the whole kind of metaphor of keeping your own garbage and living with the smell, and just lots of things that I won't do any spoilers with that, but just lots of things around things that we take for granted. I thought it was really good on things like that. There were a few lines in there as well which I thought were really good. And going back to what you were just saying, Miro, I think that kind of blurring of reality of what's real and everything. There was a line about plausibility is overrated, and I think I thought that was really really excellent. I think that was clearly one of the key themes anyway that I took from the film.
And I think in essence, because it's basically this guy on a train, tell people a bit about the story. It's a woman on a train in theory and a man on a train, and he then says he's a psychiatrist in an institution, and then he talks about his patients. And I thought I love that idea that we construct our own lives through stories. And I think that was its narrative about mental illness, whether that's right or wrong and problematic. I thought it was very interesting that it was a way of trying to construct a way through existence, through the narratives that we have here and live by. To the extent that, for example, I think at its most extreme, the story being told was 8 people removed from the era. So it was someone telling a story about someone telling a story about someone telling a story, and I think it was about 8 removed.
Yeah.
Which I thought was quite impressive the way they did that. And I thought, again, that line about plausibility I thought was excellent. So then the film is the stories being told, visualized. I thought visually it was beautiful. It was very,
absolutely. It reminded me of Wes Anderson a bit, particularly some of the early part of the film.
Absolutely. So, but again,
colour palette, yeah.
So talking about disability, we've got if we just ignore the mental health kind of character, because to some extent, so many of them are that. But if we just talk about the physical ones for a moment, you've got the one-armed man. You've got the father of the one-armed man in the wheelchair who has no legs. Then you've got the very specific tale about the 2 disabled characters, which I thought was very, very interesting. The 2 disabled characters in their kind of blossoming romance. So let's focus on sort of the 2 disabled men, the man with one arm, and so it's his story about how he lost his arm, eaten by a garbage truck, and all of that kind of stuff. What did you think about those kind of representations of those 2 men in particular, Miro?
Well, what I thought was quite interesting, if I just go to my notes, particularly at the beginning of the film, I think the film tries to challenge the normative assumptions that we make when hearing stories. So when the person on the train gets the letter from the sister, and she explains how the father who's a wheelchair user sits by the window waiting for letters to come from his son. At first, before she says the word wheelchair user, you see him in an armchair, and then it changes to a wheelchair. Then as the camera pulls back and she references, I think the father was in the army or some sort of I think he had some sort of military background. You then see that his legs are missing. So I think it's questioning that as stories are unraveling, we start to then challenge our assumptions, and perhaps we then remold our ideas and interpretation of stories to fit the narrative of what we're hearing. And I think that definitely leads back to what you were saying, Paul, in terms of, this is about multiple layers of interpretation. You've got the original event, whether it's true or is made up through story. And again, the film is saying, does that actually matter? What is there a point to, is it significant that something is made up or something is truth, and how we accept that? But then you've got these different layers of interpretation of somebody then retelling a story, somebody hearing the story, somebody watching the story unfold as a viewer watching the film. So I think that for me, those two characters, it was the beginning of trying to make us question our assumptions and our normative assumptions about what we accept as normal, but also what we then start to accept as truth, and whether we are desperate to determine and find truth, particularly when when the character, I'm conscious of spoilers, but particularly when the character, the one-armed character, comes home, retells a whole story about his military experience, and his father is so aggrieved by the idea of him lying and of telling that not the truth, to the point where he breaks a table in half through his fist and throws I think a ciabatta at the head of the one-armed character. So again, I think that was what was quite significant for me, really. And
didn't it take it a little bit further than that, in the sense that your example of he's in an armchair, then she says he's in a wheelchair, and then he's in a wheelchair. Mm-hmm. It's actually how you exploit people, characters, ideas, and archetypes to add to a story, to make it more believable, more emotive, and more persuasive. And it's actually doing that as she's speaking.
Absolutely.
Which I thought was really, really good. And again, there's lots to me about how you construct narratives that then define your life and your perspective and your worldview. And I thought that was really interesting. And again, because to some extent, all stories are lies. Every story is a lie, because, it's not someone else's experience. And if it's a story that you're absorbing, it's a lie because you haven't lived it. And even if you've lived it, it's a lie because it's distorted. Your experience of that narrative is distorted by everything around you. And I quite like the idea, because I think there was a bit of the, families fuck you up kind of idea. But then it broadened that by exploring all kinds of narratives that everything fucks you up. And you can't not be fucked up by everything.
I think what was quite clever as well, given what you've just said about those first scenes with impairment kind of appearing, a kind of almost as a subtext. I think in some ways that really set the scene for skipping on a couple to the story of the young disabled couple. Mm-hmm. Where that was kind of from the start framing the story, rather than being something that you just kind of noticed in amongst everything else. So if I remember it correctly, he starts off by saying that the disabled character starts off in that segment by saying that his experience of the world is mediated through basically lots of non-disabled people's experience through media and all that kind of thing. And of course, the whole story in some ways explores that, and explores how actually his life being defined by non-disabled experience actually serves him really badly in understanding other disabled people, and again, trying without spoilers, and his own sexuality. Even one could say that he doesn't even realise that he has a right to have a sexuality outside of that's been defined for him. Even if he recognises that he can be a sexual person. So I thought that was quite clever, how it kind of went from that initial kind of, disability's in there, to and now we're exploring disability kind of directly.
Absolutely, and I think just to come on to that as well, there's a quote somewhere in the film. I think it's when we introduce the backstory to the woman on the train, and there's that point about struggling to differentiate between author, narrator, and characters.
Yeah.
And I think that was a significant point to then, as you just talked about, Alison, trying to make sense of ourselves, trying to make sense of who we are, and actually what, in terms of trying to understand who we are, what impact does the narratives of stories that we see, that we're exposed to, which are often reflecting ideas of normality, which to us in disability studies is deeply problematic and deeply toxic in the way that normality is paraded around, and disability is seen as deviant. And I suppose that that goes also to the point that he makes when he's reflecting on his relationship, when he's in France, the person who's confined to the bed, when he talks about how within storytelling the position of disabled people is never there, and the functionality of the body is obscured. It hides the realization of impairment and difference. And then he also says, and that becomes a lie to humanity, I think is a term that he uses, which I thought was really powerful. That question of we need to make sense of the way in which stories are told to us, and indeed not just in the problems in the way that what the story is telling us. It's also the lies that stories tell us as well, and what is covered up and what is hidden as well. And that's obviously where he asked that question about where are the imperfections, where are the defects and the
but I think he even comments on that there are disabled characters, but they're just as untruthful. They're just the same kind of lies and create the same kind of fantasies, and they're exploited in the same kind of way. Because I thought that was a really different kind of perspective. And again, I think when he's telling his story of his PAs or his carers showing him pornography, I think that is 6 or 7 removed from where we are in the film to be. Yeah. And again, I thought, and again, it's that it's all lies. We build our lives on lies. Our lives are lies, which I thought was absolutely brilliant. So it was slightly, I think, what weakened the whole. And again, it's about a man who is severely impaired. We call him bedridden man. I think they call him that in it. Who meets a woman when he's finally able to walk and go out with body length calipers, which I remember from school being encouraged to use, which I stopped that as soon as I got out of school because it's a fucking nightmare. But then he goes on a trip and he meets a woman. And again, even the whole cliche of that it was in Paris, the romantic city. And I thought it layered upon layer kind of the cliches to kind of completely undermine and destroy them all. And then talk about they're all lies. And I thought that was really good. I thought my problem with that section was the treatment of the woman in that, the disabled woman. She became a bit of a body, if nothing else, through, the nudity in it, that it seemed a bit biased in that. She was...
So, isn't it? Always.
Yeah, she was incredibly beautiful as well, which again was a bit of a weakening of the whole thing. But again, it's a movie, all that kind of stuff, the business, whatever. I just accept that as a kind of narrative reality. But I think I thought it was well worth watching. So if we
can I just say, in terms of the woman, although I tend to disagree with, I tend to agree with you. I think the fact that that she is the one who acts in the end to break the myths around disabled people's sexuality, and actually the right to act outside of the roles that have been confined for us, that have been defined for us. I think that kind of helps for me.
Yeah, no, because I think it was quite good that she made the decision to leave, because just because she was disabled and was lonely, she didn't have to take that kind of behaviour, but if she didn't want to. And I so there were really good elements to it. And I thought overall it worked very nicely in what I was exploring. I think you mentioned it. What about the dogs? Let's go on to the dogs. Because I'm what do you think, Alison? So that we can temper what we say.
I don't know what Miro's what put him off his snack this morning. But for me, it wasn't particularly the more scatological aspects. It was actually the sight of a woman being forced to eat dog food was almost a bit too much to take for me.
Yeah, well, that's what Miro eats regularly. At that point,
I did think, why has Paul given us this film?
I had exactly the same thought at exactly the same time.
Yeah.
Well, it was quite interesting because I thought the whole dog thing and the woman is just explain the woman's in a relationship with a man. It's a bit dull and boring. He's not treating her very well. He doesn't want to get married. She then meets someone because of their shared love of dogs, and then let's use the phrase, it gets a little bit out of hand. And
it was quite interesting in some ways because, of course, I think we're meant to just go, oh God, how terrible to treat a woman like a dog, and of course it is. It reminded me a bit of Coronation Street actually, and there's a similar storyline, not including dogs.
That's not what I expected you to say.
But no, I was thinking about that, and it did take it to quite extreme places, and I get a bit like the last film we discussed. I thought. But I'm probably not going to be popular for saying this, but I thought, well, this idea of treating a woman like a dog, we're a culture that apparently loves our pets and things like that, and it's like it wasn't unravelled in the film, but it's like the idea that it's okay to treat animals in the way that we treat them. Not particularly dog food. You probably like dog food. I know very little about dogs, but again, just like the narrative in the section before, and the awful kind of narrative, the awful stories about children. There's another thing there about well, is it okay for a man to actually or a woman to sink their identity and to rely on animals to meet their needs? So that was quite an interesting narrative that I would like to see get explored a bit more, actually.
You don't think it did explore it, though? Do you not think it did unravel that by what it did in the exploitation of the woman?
Yeah.
But then again, I think Spain has a very serious problem with its treatment of women and notions of masculinity. I think murders of women in domestic violence, all of those kind of things.
And animal welfare.
Exactly. It does have a problematic relationship with animal welfare. And I thought it used a lot of the cliches around, like just even like the word bitch and putting it with women and all that kind of stuff and how men treat women. I thought it took it to the extreme to strengthen that argument, and I thought it did it very well, actually. And I thought that I hated it, but I thought it was really good.
It probably did, because I'm still thinking about it, and that's usually I haven't quite. I think because we only watched it this morning, things like that take a while for me to.
And I thought one of the best bits about that, or the most powerful, was at the most horrific moments, you have that love song playing, which is called El Amor by Massiel, who was actually the woman who beat Cliff Richard in Eurovision in the late 60s. And she is a massive Spanish star. And the song, and it was a typical Spanish, over-emotional, building up. And I love the song to the extent I now have it. But again, you've got that popular music, all of that fantasy of you'll do anything for love. That song, which again was a massive hit by a legendary Spanish singer, in Spain, that's all there. I think, you know, Miro said something about that there's Basque stuff in there, which as a kind of non-Spanish person, we don't get. And equally, the song about the abuse of women, with that playing on it, I thought that was so powerful. It added to the horrific nature of it. It added to the fact that we create love on the basis of narratives of love that we hear. And I thought the power of that was, and the song just was so perfect. And it didn't just build up to a crescendo and come down. It was so Spanish. It went up to a crescendo and then up and then up and then up, and never ended. And I thought that was what the narrative was doing, in a way that said, you know, don't fucking do this. It is utterly ridiculous to do this. And the music did that as well. And to believe in these fantasies, these illusions, these narratives that are other people's narratives that are fucking your life up, just don't do it. And I thought that was...
No, I think you're right. And I think in time I'll probably go and watch it again, because, like I said, it's still processing. But it was uncomfortable to watch. And of course, I think, I'm sure one of you will mention it anyway, it goes back right to the first line of the film, which is one of the best opening lines I've ever heard, which refers to that. Can you remember the line?
No.
I don't want to spoil it for anybody. It would say, if I said it, I could
say it. Just say it. Say it.
It's about coming home and surprising your partner who's busy exploring his poo with a popsicle stick. And I'm just like, what? Right at the beginning, which refers, of course, to that to the end of that segment and the dog segment.
Yeah.
So I think it's really interesting. So sorry, I'm flipping about a bit, but I think it's really interesting that her job is as an editor, and the way it's pieced together. And of course, we know that, you know, it all revolves around Helga anyway. So yeah.
Yep. No, I it's funny because I thought this is deeply disturbing. It probably is dubious, but I thought the power of it was superseded that in a way. And again, and I think, because I you know, I've been to Spain quite a lot, and it does have a really serious problem with its treatment of women, you know, and even kind of like trying to create narratives to empower women of, it's fair enough if you kill someone who treats you like that, you know, her dream of what she does to him, but then isn't a dream, but then it becomes a reality, but through medicalization. Because, you know, she drugs him so that he then actually does need a lobotomy. They talk about a lobotomy at one point, I think, for him, the doctor in the institution that he's now in. And I thought it works so well. And again, Spanish films are disturbing quite often. They have a particular kind of narrative thrust that tends to push the boundaries in a way that French or even German or English films don't particularly do. That I thought it delivered a punch that I hadn't seen in any other films for a very long time. Both about disability, about women, about animal welfare, you know, all of that kind of stuff. And again, you're talking to someone, I hate dogs. I do. I hate dogs. I always have, because I was attacked by a police dog as a child. And so, but I thought it worked so well. Miro, what do you think?
Just to say on that, there's a couple of points. One is because it made me think, when it got to the end of the film and Helga is having that meeting with the clinician in the institution, and you're talking about the lobotomy, and then it made me think right back to the beginning when Martin, as the one-armed Air Force cadet who's been, you know, stationed in Kosovo, and he's going through the hospital, and his mate who's talking to him, Martin's not listening to him, is talking about lobotomy and the process of lobotomy, and something to do with linking it to vets as well. It made me then think, well, I wonder actually whether Helga's story, is that even supposed to be real, or is that supposed to be actually part of the narrative and the blurring of the line between reality and fiction?
So was it that the stories that we hear and construct are our own form of lobotomization?
Yeah, but do you want to say a bit more on that?
Well, that actually, you know, a lobotomy just stops you thinking clearly and takes away things and all those kind of things. And actually, the narratives that we construct our own lives are a self-lobotomizing kind of process to ignore the terrible things around us and live in a fantasy world. You know, I think.
Of course, that's what an editor does, isn't it?
Yeah.
Lobotomise his stories.
or takes it in a particular direction so that you ignore that bit, and it can be a nice a kind of fantasy harmonized version to deliver X, A, B, C, or D. And a lobotomy does that for people to some extent that medical has defined are unable to do that, i.e. the mentally ill. And so it's a medical editing.
And I think, you know, just going back to, you know, the second part of the second act in the film around Helga's, you know, backstory. You know, in the first part, in the first act, you know, when you're talking about Martin's story, you've got the self-absorption of garbage and waste and shit, and then you know, kind of the self-containment and holding on to that and all the issues that come with that. But then when you come to Helga's backstory, I think, you know, there's a quite interesting quote when she meets, I can't remember his name, but when she meets the guy who's working in the kiosk, who we later find out has got a fascination with dogs. You know, she says all things are present from their beginnings, and then you see this slow decline of control. You know, you see forms of resistance that she tries to enact in terms of, you know, she says, no, I don't want to be involved in these kind of performances. He then punishes her through withdrawal of affection and interaction. And then as she starts to become more and more consumed by the life of the dogs or the animals, you know, there you see elements of this kind of internalized oppression. She even refers at one point when he kisses her on the face, you know, he kissed my muzzle, which I thought was again.
Oh God, yeah. Oh.
Yeah, you know, she starts to talk about herself and her body as one that is an animal. And I thought that was, you know, that was really interesting. So, you know, again, exploring those ideas of resistance, and of course, whereas it starts with him being absorbed in the ideas of dogs, it then transitions to being absorbed about fecal matter. Hence why we see him, you know, looking at his own fecal matter and
aren't we all obsessed with our own fecal matter?
Well, quite possibly. But again, I think it's a way of linking the stories together and blurring the ideas of taking parts of different stories and narratives, bringing them together to make sense of our own selves and our own storyline, as you said, and that kind of, you know, essence of picking parts of different stories as a way to then come to a conclusion as to what really matters and where we are and where we find ourselves, and the realization that actually perhaps our life is one of oppression and consistent authority of telling us where we are and who we should be with and where we should live our life, and who indeed authorizes or legitimizes our own stories. You know, the idea of ultimately you have the character on the train, the man on the train, and he's only permitted to live his life through his stories because the clinicians have said, well, our idea of therapy is to let him come and go into the institution as he wishes, let him tell his stories to people, let him blur the ideas and lines of the different stories that he comes across and creates. And I thought that was quite interesting in the element of power and authority.
Mm.
So was he saying that we are literally what we are doing now is us looking at fecal matter with a popsicle stick? In that stories are just shit, and we all try and give them meaning and interpretation and explore them. What does it mean?
But the good shit, aren't they, Paul? The good shit.
Well, that's what I always say about my own, anyway. So, but I think the film was saying that, but not that the film is shit, but actually, as Miro said in that line he quoted about, you know, it's all there at the beginning, and that line he just mentioned, which I forgot. What was the line, Miro?
It was
present from the start.
Yeah, yeah. So all things are present from the beginning.
All things are present. So
yeah,
we all know women are treated shit, animals are treated shit. We don't need a story to tell us that. You know, we know that, but actually we ignore it through all the other stories that we construct around our lives. And actually, we should just focus on stopping it, ending it, and creating a better society for us all, and disabled people as well. We know disabled people are treated like shit. We know that porn, and I thought it tapped quite nicely into a lot of contemporary issues, and sort of said, well, we know that happens. What we need to do is stop it, not tell stories about it. For example, sexual exploitation of victims of wars, which is what the Kosovo story was, the exploitation of children, the exploitation of women, all of those things. We know all that from the very beginning, but we don't deal with that. We make stories about it to make ourselves feel better about it.
Yeah.
And I thought that was, and we just end up looking through shit, trying to give things meaning, when in fact...
That reminds me, I thought there's lots of really little like critical moments in the film, and I thought in the first kind of horror story, which was truly horrific, the fact that one of the beneficiaries of the horrible stuff that was going on was going to be an avant-garde artist who
New York,
to show his work in New York.
Yeah.
It kind of reminded me of some of the stuff that was in the Square a couple of years ago. It's just like, the people who we really trust to tell the stories that seem to matter the most and seem to be taken most seriously by those in power. It's like it wasn't swerving away from the fact that those people can be actually among the worst.
And to add to that as well, when the character realizes what is happening to the children when he meets the guy in the park, and he says, the state legitimizes this, the state accepts it because it allows them to then achieve their social policy aims of getting kids off the streets and so on. I thought that was quite significant as well. It shows, going back to the points we just said, the points we were making, we know all of these things, and yet we allow these acts of surveillance, the continuous amount of increased surveillance that we have over our bodies in different ways, the acceptance of professionals to make judgments about our bodies and determine what we can and can't have. We know all of this, and yet it's about trying to make sense of what kind of gains are they trying to get from this, and therefore what lives will they accept and what lives will they tolerate in order to pursue their aspirations and ambitions.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, anything else anybody wants to say? I think we've covered quite a lot.
I think it's important parallels actually just at the moment in terms of who we test drugs on, who gets to take the risks so the rest of us can live better. And I think it had some. I felt lots of echoes with the current moment with that first one in particular, I think.
Well, and the woman who prostituted herself to get the charity to run the hospital by sacrificing not just her own body, but also sacrificing children along the way, literally. And I thought that it had so many areas that were so insightful in a way for a mainstream film. That's an attack on charity, what charity is. What you have to do to get charity.
Absolutely, I really did. I just after watching it, I think that was one of my favourite ones, actually. Yeah.
And again, although it's horrible to watch, and again, it's quite rare that you can say it was. I thought it was a truly excellent film, a really clever film, a really intelligent film, a really insightful, a really political film. But it was absolutely horrible to watch. But actually, that's what makes it. I think I'm very disappointed that it hasn't got many nominations in the Spanish Oscars, which are called Goyas, because I think it's much more visually stunning than a lot of other stuff. And equally, the ideas in it, just playing with ideas, which again, it's both critical of, but sort of saying, be critical of the notion of ideas and stories and lies. I thought it was so good.
Yeah, I tend to agree, although I might change my mind next week.
You started off by saying, Alison, that you had some problems with the treatment of women, I think, or simplified ideas.
No, not particularly with the treatment. I mean, to some extent, if you talk about the treatment of women and it being bad, well, what's bad and good is showing the treatment of women as you know, suffering at the hands of men, bad in that it's reminding us of what happens, or you know, it's not, those aren't easy conversations to have, are they? And of course, it's not very nice seeing a woman being oppressed and then more oppressed and in that kind of way. But if we don't tell those stories, then that's worse, I think. So
Absolutely.
That's not my biggest issue with the film. I think it'd be quite easy to accept the kind of less visible mental health discourses in there, even though we've talked about lobotomy and things like that. I think to some degree, you know, the fact of, oh, somebody does that and you put them in an institution, and like who's the one with the mental health problems and all the rest. That didn't go as deeply as a lot of the other explorations went, I think.
But would you not sort of say that perhaps that's what the whole film was about?
Well, it is on the one hand. I find it very, very gratifying that it's good reading for me to take from it. But I could quite see if somebody said, actually, this makes me feel worse because this wasn't treated with sufficient kind of I don't know,
Gravitas.
criticality on the role of the institution, for example.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a problem with a lot of films, particularly about disability, that sort of create a kind of an illusion of empowerment and insight, but actually don't question the fundamentals of the scenario. For example, you know, there's lots of films about people, you know, being empowered and given good lives in an institution that don't ever question the notion of the existence of institutions. And I think that's very true. So, anything else?
Yeah, I'm just trying to put on that kind of lens. I wondered, where can people access this? I know we got access to it through you, but how? Because if we talk about it, if people want to watch it, how do they get it?
That's a good question. I suspect. I think the thing is it's very new. I think within a few months it'll probably be on a streaming platform, Netflix, Amazon Prime, one of them.
Some countries haven't released it yet. They're going to release it in May.
Okay.
So I think that's what's going to.
Yeah, and so on. And equally,
I have one friend in particular, I'm not listening to this, and she will probably want to watch it, I think. So that's one reason I was asking, in case she says, where do I find it? So
yeah,
hopefully other listeners as well.
Absolutely, and I think we're probably well ahead of the game. And I you know, we were just lucky to be able to do it. But I think it'll probably be out in the not too distant, particularly in the current situation, where most even cinema-only films are instantly being put on streaming platforms. And I think most of the streaming platforms are very good at foreign language films in a way that cinemas aren't, actually. And one of the benefits of, I think, of many streaming platforms. For example, I wanted to watch a film called Britt Marie Was Here, which is a Swedish film that never would have been released here, but it's actually on Amazon Prime. So, you know, which I thought was a really nice film. It's not a great piece of art, but I think it will be on one of the streaming platforms in the not too distant future. And I think if they just keep an eye on IMDb, perhaps create a list, that usually tells you when things are on and where you can see them. On that note, because you're breaking up, Alison,
Okay.
I
think we've probably had enough. Of any more to say, Miro? Are you happy?
No, just to say that, you know, I think it from, you know, it's a summary. It questions that role of ignorance in our lives. I suppose, you know, something I wrote down. You know, whether it's done by naivety or whether it's done deliberately, you know, you want to ignore things, as kind of explored the things we've been saying. It's that question of ignorance and the role that ignorance plays, and the problems that come from being ignorant, as well as the relief that also comes from being ignorant as well.
And the stories that are told that create that ignorance.
Absolutely, yeah. No, and also I think the last thing as well is I was interested in the amount of relationships in the film. Again, I think this is probably you know, the director and the writer was trying to emphasize the role of the market economy. Now, they talk about the market economy when when they discuss the plight of the children in Kosovo. But it's that question of, a lot of the main relationships in the film, every offer or every action that's taken has a condition attached to it. So, the woman, Helga, can have love if she abides by the rules of living like an animal. And there was a number of those examples I thought in the film, which I thought was a really important message about, how what we need is only ever provided to us on the basis of us meeting a condition in response. The woman in the hospital, she has to sell her body in order to get charity. The guy who is who introduces her to all the money is in response to giving a child every month to the group of horrible people. So again, I think that was quite interesting. Well, the conditionality that is put on every part of our life.
Absolutely. And again, you don't see that anywhere else. I thought it was excellent. So, and again, in the world we're living in now, that notion of conditionality is just soul destroying.
Well, I think that's what, for me, it was a case of there is conditionality everywhere in life, and also at the same time, if that is coupled with the idea of ignorance, then it shows you actually how self-absorbed we become, and we become lost then in trying to make sense of the power relations and the importance of resistance, and in fact what it is that we're trying to achieve through our stories.
On that note, thank you both.